Members of the public, can I just take a show of hands? Could you indicate for me if you're here for the Field House application? Okay. Those here for Curlew Close at Wharton? Thank you. So, members, I was thinking of changing the agenda, but I think we've got the balance was a little, I think, in favour of Curlew Close. So we'll do the Curlew Close, and then it's very easy in the way it's first and second on the agenda, so you'll be able to go fairly soon. But you know, you are more than welcome to stop here and all the pearls of wisdom that members of the council are going to say. But we'll get to your application as soon as we possibly can. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's meeting. We are broadcasting? Yep. So the first item on the agenda is the evacuation procedure. We're not expecting to have a fire alarm. So if you hear the fire alarm or anybody running around saying, please leave the building, it's likely to be a real emergency. Please leave the building by the nearest, safest exit, which is likely to be that door, and go to assembly point G on the car park. Please stay there until the council officers say it's safe to go. Might be Mr. Tobin, because we've got a register which has to give to the fire brigade in case there's an emergency, and we don't want a fireman having to run around the building that's burning looking for people who've already gone home. Agenda item number 2 is members of the council who are absent or on official council business. Mr. Tobin?
Chair, apologies to Councillor Rose, who's been avoided being delayed by work.
Councillor Mawson also sends apologies, he's come over on well.
Thank you. Members are happy to note those apologies. Thank you. Any disclosable pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests you would like to? Councillor Riley?
Chair, I am the applicant for application 5E, and I also have an employment interest in agenda item number 10. Would you like me to leave the room?
Now or later?
Preferably now, I should go.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. We now move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of April. Members, are you happy that I signed them as a true and correct record?
Yep.
Thank you very much. Application number 246 for land to adjacent to 15 Curlew Crescent Walk. We have 2 speakers on this application. The first is Ms. Linda Roberts. Ms. Roberts, if you take the speaker's chair. Before we invite you to speak, Mr. Brown will introduce his report, and we have a letter which I need to draw members' attention to, which we'll hear immediately after Mr. Brown has spoken, and Mr. Tobin will read it out. So, Mr. Brown.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just remind members of the slides, so you can recognise where you are, because this item is deferred from the last meeting. I think there's only one slide, Mr. Chairman. Members will be familiar with the site, top right-hand corner here, with the Osprey Road going through the village here, and Curlew Close, the cul-de-sac coming around here. It's bend here, the application site, and joining the Curlew and Curlew Close. And then in front of the layout, as you can see here, it's a cul-de-sac with the sustainable drainage systems and arrangements at the bottom end of the lower end of the site. Which is here, and the drainage pond here, and the green areas around that, and also in the middle of the site, with access off Curlew Close here. The application is for 28 affordable dwellings. Street scene, illustrative scenes, as you can see there, members will have seen that from last time. As the report indicates, Mr. Chairman, this item was deferred because there was a missing report in the last agenda. That has now been attached, and it is the Parish Council's report. They commissioned transport consultants to look at the highway situation here, and the report is attached in full as an appendix to this report this time. As therefore, Mr. Chairman, the recommendation remains exactly the same as printed in the programme last time in Appendix B, which is the recommendation of refusal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Tobin.
Thank you. In a moment, those objecting to the application will be given a total of 3 minutes to speak. That the first part of that 3 minutes will be myself reading out the letter of objection that's been received from Mr. Hill, and then following that, Ms. Roberts will be will be making her statement. Now, I'll have to apply the rules strictly, and a total of 3 minutes will be allowed. And of course, I'll try and read this as succinctly as I can.
I do apologise. I don't know if anybody else is struggling to hear. Mr. Sang, the other gentleman.
Well, I'll start again for the benefit of any of those people who didn't hear. In a moment, those objecting to the application will be given 3 minutes to speak. That first part of that 3 minutes will be myself reading out the letter from Mr. Hill that's been submitted, and the second part will be Ms. Roberts, who will be speaking following that. I need to strictly apply the rules, so it's only a total of 3 minutes is allowed. So as soon as I've finished reading that statement, then I'll indicate to yourself that it's your opportunity.
Sorry, where does 3 minutes come from?
The council have set some rules for those speaking on planning applications. A total of 3 minutes is allowed, both for and against.
For each person?
No, for each application. The letter from Mr. Hill reads, planning objection. This application has generated overwhelming opposition from the community. We believe it would cause irreparable harm. It's been defended on the grounds that it provides affordable housing. There is no proof of this need in Warton. The development is, in any case, in the wrong place. It would be isolated on the edge of the village without easy access to services. Section 106 funds would not solve these problems. Agricultural land is destroyed. The site extends well beyond the development line. Housing in the vicinity includes a mixture of styles from the 1870s to the 1970s. The development will be completely out of character in its uniformity of style and overall scale. Planning officers rightly focused on the failure of the plans to accord with major local and national policies. We urge councillors to reflect on this and the 66 objections with only one letter of support. We believe the proposal should be objected.
3 mile radius of Curlew Close covers 28 square miles and contains the wards of Warton and Newton Regis, Polesworth East, Polesworth West and Dordon. Polesworth Parish Council has said that Polesworth, Dordon and Grendon conurbation has or will shortly become North Warwickshire's largest residential area. The residents of Warton fear that the village will be swamped with social housing intended for this conurbation and wonder whether it's the intention of the panel to do this. In June 2020, 67 people within this 3 mile radius were waiting for social housing, virtually all of them from Polesworth and Dordon. This represented 22% of the total for the borough. Housing developments already granted within this area at that time would be sufficient for 5.5 years of demand. Some developments have been finalised, and this has resulted in a significant reduction in the waiting list for people living within this radius. We are now at 13% of the borough as a whole, and again, virtually all from Polesworth and Dordon. Current property in the pipeline will satisfy demand for the next 5 years. There is no need for this development. Concerns are raised about the northwestern boundary, where a ground height of the plot is at least half a metre higher than that of the existing property. As plot 9 is close to the boundary and positioned rearward than higher, it would dwarf the existing property. There will be a lot of privacy, with overlooking into the bedroom windows, living space and garden, which cannot be mitigated by hedgerows or sizable trees, particularly as this risks foundation damage. The loss of privacy wouldn't be limited but considerable, and we do not believe that this is in line with the guidelines of material planning consideration. We all urge the council to recognise the significant harm that this development will cause and hope that you will reject this application. Thank you.
Very good timing. It's 3 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. I normally welcome speakers, and so I didn't have the opportunity, but you are obviously very welcome.
Thank you.
Members, do you have any questions for our speaker, or indeed regarding the letter submitted by Mr. Hill? No questions, so thank you very much indeed. Our next speaker is Mr. Matthew Topping. Mr. Topping, do you take the speaker's chair?
Chair, Mr. Topping is joining the
Oh, I do apologise. Mr. Topping, you are very welcome joining us remotely.
Thank you.
Mr. Tobin.
Yeah, Mr. Topping, similar to the previous speaker, you'll be given 3 minutes in which to address the committee. I will tell you when that 3 minutes start, when you have 1 minute remaining, and then when your time is up.
Thank you.
Starts now. The 3 minutes starts now.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Matthew Topping of Platform Housing Group, and I'm here to speak in support of the application for the proposed affordable housing development off Curlew Close in Wharton. For anyone that is not aware, Platform is a not-for-profit housing association created following a merger of Waterloo Housing Group and Fortis Living. Platform currently owns and manages approximately 48,000 affordable properties, with 766 of those in North Warwickshire, and has a long history of working closely with the District Council to provide new affordable homes for residents of the borough. On this occasion, we are working in partnership with the applicant in the hope of developing a landscape-led, low-density scheme of 28 new homes. This includes 6 bungalows with 100% affordable housing provision. These homes would contribute towards meeting an identified unmet need for affordable homes in Wharton, and will also be supported by grant funding from Homes England. I'm going to focus on the affordable housing element, as the planning officer's report deals with all of the design and technical details of the proposal. North Warwickshire and the village of Wharton more specifically are areas of significant housing demand, and particularly in regard to the need for additional affordable housing. As of April 2022, there were 41 applicants on the council's waiting list in need of an affordable rented home in the village of Wharton. Although other developments have been approved in Wharton which have contributed to meeting affordable housing need, this is the up-to-date residual need figure with no current allocations of land available to meet this need. Furthermore, the housing officer has pointed out that this is an underestimate of need, as it only includes those who have applied for to the council for rented accommodation, so it does not include households who are aiming to access the housing ladder through the affordable shared ownership route. And when we talk about affordable housing, they're homes for people who cannot afford to buy a home privately or renting privately. The housing officer has also confirmed that the mix of homes that we are proposing to provide aligns with the identified need, and so this scheme fully accords with the borough's local plan policy LP9 in meeting affordable housing need in the borough. As confirmed by the planning officer, this should be given substantial weight and should not be underestimated in the decision making. As mentioned towards the end of the officer's report, this application is a matter of planning judgment, and their recommendation has been reached on balance. However, a different outcome is possible if members are to attribute a greater weight to the provision of affordable housing. It can't be underestimated how important and life-changing a new affordable home could be for a local person who may otherwise not be able to live in the village. As a housing association, we're acutely aware and see daily the huge impact that this can have on people's lives, acting more than just a roof over a personal family's head, but also a springboard for them to access other opportunities and success in life.
3 minutes has now ended.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Topping. Members, do you have any questions for our speaker? There were no questions, so thank you, Mr. Topping.
Thank you.
Members, as you will no doubt recall, we deferred this item at the last meeting because Appendix B, the Poleswood Parish Council transport statement, was not attached. Can I just check you've now all had a copy of Appendix B and had the opportunity to read it? Thank you very much. Any comments or proposals, members? Councillor
Chair,
Humphries?
I'm the local representative. I'm more than happy to recommend take on the officer's recommendation of refusal and the reasons that are there. I spoke about this in the past, and other people from the public have spoken about it in the past, and I think there's enough information there for the members to take on board and refuse the application. So I'll propose refusal.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Hayfield?
I just was going to second it, but
simply say that because you can create an argument that you need affordable housing, that in itself is not justification for putting affordable housing here, there, or anywhere else. It has to be an appropriate site for the affordable housing. I don't believe this is, so I'm happy to support it.
Members, anyone else? Councillor Parsons?
Yeah, I'd just like to support the last two comments, basically. Yes, as opposed to attempts. Yeah, this doesn't seem well planned. It doesn't seem to meet the need, and traffic survey does not come out positively. It's a good reason.
Thank you. Councillor Hancock?
I'm supporting everybody, but I think there's a note here that yes, we do need affordable housing, but there's different kinds of affordable housing. And I'm reading through to say that social housing, 70% social housing going into Wharton at this point, when there's only 2 in Wharton on the register waiting for council, is not helpful to Wharton. And I think that we have to understand affordable housing. We need to be helping people on the housing ladder as a planning board, not just putting social housing in places that really don't have the need. So I will be supporting the proposal.
Clearly popular.
First time for everything.
That's for everybody.
Does anybody else have anything you'd like to say? In which case, the application has been proposed and seconded for planning permission to be refused. I see all those in favour of refusal. And those against? And any abstentions? In which case, the planning permission is refused.
We don't normally
Members will put it, please don't applaud, it only goes to their heads. If anybody would like to leave us, we can wait a couple of minutes to give you time to go.
Yes, me too. Thank you for your saying that.
So members, we now move to application 159 for House Witherley Road, Addison. Again, we have 2 speakers, the first of which is Mr. Lee Everett. Mr. Everett, if you take the speaker's chair, while Mr. Brown introduces his report. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just get the slides up for you. As members are aware, this application was deferred at the last meeting for a site visit, and there's a note of that visit attached as one of the appendices to the report. Let me just run through the slides so that members are aware of where we are. And I'll also try and indicate those members that weren't on the site visit where we actually went. You can see the site here outlined in red with the Witherley Road at the top and Nursery Road down here with the housing here and Peel House at the front. The application site is up here. And then in terms of the proposal, the extensions to the cottage here to provide 1 unit or a large unit, and then the main building here, the detached property here. The report refers to housing in numbers 37, 39 and 40 Nursery Road. You can see the location there with the access off the end of Nursery Road into here. For those members that didn't go on the site visit, we actually parked in Peel House and members had a good look around the rear garden. They looked at the boundary treatments here. They looked at the difference in levels here, where the access would come and the levels of the actual property itself. So that was looked at from Peel House, and members then went round to Nursery Road to look at the site from the other side. They were able to see that the properties here, 37, 39 and 40, they were able to see the existing wall, which is on the red line here, and also to see the position of the access where it cuts across that wall, so they could see the amount of wall that was actually to be removed as part and parcel of the proposal. There it is. Members on the site visit will recognise that. In terms of the properties, the elevations, I'll just run through these because these are what we saw on the previous slides. The difference in levels you can see here on this particular plan at the bottom, where there is a drop to the site itself. What I'll do, Mr. Chairman, is I'll leave, for the present time, I'll leave that one up. So members, it was referred to a site visit that took place. And also members wanted more information on the actual historic value or the historic source of the wall itself they saw on the site. And that's been provided. You'll see from the report, Mr. Chairman, there are 4 or 5 plans at the end of that report, which have a sequence of time from the 1900s right through to the 1990s, where, as the report now indicates, this site was separate from the convent. And this is not the convent wall. Since the publication of the report, an additional plan has been provided, which was circulated to members last week. That's now on the desks of members in front of you, and there are some spare ones at the back of on the speaker's bench for the members of the public to have a look at, which just confirms exactly what I've just said about the historic source of that particular wall. Whilst on site, the members did look at the possibility of trying to look at 2 pillars, retaining the bricks from parts of the wall on the other side of the access, and we understand that the applicant is favourable to that particular suggestion. So as you can see from the report, Mr. Chairman, the appendix remains the same, but there is reference to those brick piers either side of the access to be built with reclaimed bricks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Everett, welcome back to the council.
Thank you.
Mr. Tony?
Mr. Everett, I know you've spoken before, but just to fair to all those present, just to explain that you have 3 minutes to address the board. I will tell you when that 3 minutes start. I'll tell you when you have 1 minute remaining, and I'll tell you when you have finished your time.
Thank you.
3 minutes starts now.
Okay, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Board, thank you for visiting the site to see firsthand our reasons for objections. These still stand. Our main objections are removal of part of the boundary wall, privacy and amenity, and the road access through Nursery Road. Removal of the boundary wall. This wall has stood for over 200 years and is a prominent feature of the cul-de-sac, which is what Nursery Road has been since it was originally designed. Residents still argue that it still has historical value. I mentioned in the last meeting that an outbuilding had been removed to the side of the cottage and gave reference to figure 07, page 14. The said building was removed by a former tenant of the cottage. That person still looks after the gardens for the occupants of Peel House. To suggest that I've mistaken this as work currently being carried out in Peel House is an insult to my intelligence, as I've witnessed this firsthand. Privacy and amenity to our family home. The new dwelling proposed is in close proximity to our house. We have 3 windows to the side elevation, all which are deemed non-habitable according to case law. These 3 windows provide daylight and contribute to amenity, yet is disregarded by the applicant. Loss of light is flippantly suggested to be insignificant, but I argue that it will be significant, as we have had no restrictions on light or shadowing in our 22 years of habitants. Road access through the Nursery Road. The residents do not want access at Nursery Road, which will result in months of heavy construction traffic and noise. Refuse vehicles still reverse down this road because access is difficult. Cars have to be moved to allow the wagon to pass. There are lots of vehicles parked on the roadside, contrary to what the report says. The road will be situated at the end of drives 39 and 40, very close proximity. Visibility for us will be very limited, despite what the applicant says. The plans do not show a large privet hedge to the left of 39's driveway as you face it. This affects visibility when leaving in a forward motion or reversing. Amendments have been made to offer the applicant clear visibility. This, however, cannot be said to the occupants of 39 or
We have 1 minute remaining.
In conclusion, people should be at the heart of every community, and a new development is not in the best interest of the residents of Nursery Road, many which have been there for over 40 years. The applicant has given us no consideration and has in effect passed on his problem. I would also like to point out that amendments and recommendations made in favour of the applicant were carried out after a deadline date, 10th of the 3rd, 22, as indicated in an email by Mr Brown. The amendments were a revised access drawing and an updated site plan. In our opinion, every effort has been made to support the applicant, not the resident. As a planning board, we urge you to reject the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Everett. Members, do you have any questions for our speaker? No questions, Mr Everett, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mr Ian Ritchie. Mr Ritchie, if you take the chair. Welcome back, Mr Ritchie.
Thank you.
Mr Toby.
Mr Ritchie, as you're aware, you'll be given 3 minutes in which to address the board. So I'll tell you when your 3 minutes starts, when you have 1 minute remaining, and then when your time is up. Your time starts now.
Thank you. I should be brief. A number of concerns were voiced at the last meeting, so I'd therefore like to clarify some of the following. I think the relevance to the garden wall was covered by Mr Brown, and I think we have confirmed that piers will be built at the entrance from using reclaimed bricks and pier cappings to match those that exist currently on the site. Excuse me. Concern was also expressed that unauthorised works had commenced on the cottage. In fact, decoration work had been undertaken to accommodate a Ukrainian family, and that had been inspected by the council's officers under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. Those members who visited the site were able to, amongst other things, to view the 3 windows in the gable of the adjacent property. Of the 3 windows, only one is a habitable room. One is actually serves a garage, which is also served by another window facing the rear of the property. Clearly, there is a significant level difference between Nursery Road and the rear garden of Peel House, and this was identified at the site meeting. The garage and parking areas are located sufficiently distanced from the proposed access to accommodate appropriate gradients to the approval of the Highway Authority. There were originally concerns expressed by County Highways, however those have been resolved, resulting in there having no objection to the current proposal. Suggestion was also made regarding potential access from Witherley Road, which, as the chairman can attest, does not provide good visibility due to the stone walling immediately to the rear of the pavement. Thank you, Chairman.
And thank you. Members, do you have any questions for our speaker? Thank you very much, Mr Ritchie.
Thank you.
Mr Brown, do you have anything you would wish to say relating to the question raised by Mr Everett?
No, Mr Chair. No, Mr Chairman, the County Council has now issued a no objection letter, which I referred to at the Planning Committee, and that's now copied in the papers, and therefore you have the application in front of you, the full application in front of you, and the benefit of the site visit, I see no reason to defer the application again.
Thank you. Any legal guidance, Mr Tobin?
Nothing to add, Chair.
Thank you very much. Members. Councillor Mrs Clues, as one of the local members, you previously indicated you'd like to speak. Would you like to speak now or later?
I'll speak now, Mr Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clues.
I've not got much more to say than what I said at the last planning meeting, other than tonight we've had 2 applications and we've seen that the residents that was here tonight, the residents that have lived there all their life, the residents that are proud of their houses. Now I think, it may not be a planning issue, but to me it is an issue. And one of the other frustrating things, which has also been mentioned tonight, is that it was brought up at this meeting last time, that up till a few hours of this meeting, the highways had not even made a decision. And this is another thing that I think is not right. Even if from what has happened here, that we get this right, that, you know, people seem to know what is going on rather than the last minute decisions that are brought to this council. But looking behind me, I just don't think this planning application is for Nursery Road. And I'd like to ask this planning board tonight to refuse this application. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brown, thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously living in that area, I'm well versed with the area, and echoing a lot of what Councillor Clue says, the highways made what was a very, very valid objection to it. It carried a lot of weight, and when you looked at the road safety issues, they were perfectly evident, and that decision by county, to me, carried quite a bit of weight. Because if you look at what they say now, that it makes it safer by taking a chunk out of the wall, that is absolutely impossible. Because if you look at the trajectory of the two drives that come out of number 39 and 40, they do not cross. But if you look at this application, it actually, the trajectory of the two drives of the application and 39 cross very close to the edge of the highway. Now, to say this makes it safer, I just can't see that. Because the trajectory of the drives around there do not cross. This creates a position where two drives actually cross. So how county can say that that makes it safer, goodness knows. One little comment on this last sheet that's come out. If you look at the very bottom line, and I'm bearing in mind this has been produced by the applicant, it says it's highly unlikely. Now, highly unlikely doesn't mean yes, and it doesn't mean no. It means that they don't know. That's my interpretation. It's highly unlikely. Is it likely? Is it unlikely? That doesn't make that clear in any way, shape or form to me. Details of the surface and gradients can be considered at a later date. The gradients can be considered now. And I know I'm not very tall, Mr. Chairman, but if I stand on the application site, I can hardly see Nursery Road. It's almost at eye level. That's the drop between Nursery Road and the site. Now, to say this can be considered later, and this is one of the things that I said last time, that it looks all right on a 2D sheet of paper, but when you look at it in 3D, by actually standing there, it makes a totally different, or sets a totally different light on it. That it is one heck of a drop from one to the other. And together, and as they say, look, it's been, the vehicle tracking has been done so they can get basically an Ocado truck in and out safely. I would question whether that's possible. When you look at the difference in heights, it's obviously got to be built up. Now, we're all aware when you build land up, it shifts water. It doesn't allow it to stay where it is, it moves it. Now, if they're going to build this land up by a good 1.5 meters, is that water going to go into the gardens of adjoining properties? Got to go somewhere. It can't just lie on there. It will run somewhere, and water naturally finds the lowest point. So it will run somewhere else. Might clear the applicant's site, but only move the problem onto somebody else. So in conclusion, I just cannot see this being any way being suitable, whether it's in neighbour amenity, whether it's in road safety, and I just couldn't support that application.
Thank you, Councillor Jones.
You don't speak.
I'll let you speak.
You speak first.
Okay. Any speaker right now would help.
Well, that's fine. I also echo what Councillor Jarvis said, and obviously my wife, Councillor Clues. I am a local member for that area, but that doesn't anyway change my views, because obviously it is neighbour amenities that are causing the problem. There is an issue with the height, and I can't personally see how the angle of where they're going to start moving from and coming out of the entrance is going to be safe. I'm going to go with everyone else that has said this, and I'm going to refuse the application on. So, I recommend refusal, sir.
Thank you, Mark.
That's a recommendation of refusal, Chair. I will second that.
Thank you. Councillor Dermott.
Thank you. I'm not the local member to this area. And unfortunately, due to COVID, I wasn't able to attend the site visit, but I am very, very familiar with the site, having lived there for a while. We've been shown evidence, I think, that we have to agree with about the wall not being part of the convent, unfortunately. And that was one of the things that I was saying I thought was really important. But it does say here that that wall marks the edge of the estate of the Elms, which was an important property and still is a non-designated heritage asset. So therefore it still has importance. And I think that that importance should be recognised, and that we should try to preserve it still without knocking another bit of our heritage down. Normally when we have a listed building, we talk about the curtilage of it, and I think that this is part of that. So I think that it's still important. So I still disagree with the conclusion that it is not important. Having lived there and looked again recently at the road access around there and the safety aspects and the route through there, the public footpaths from the school, the rest of that area, I still believe that what is being proposed in that corner is not safe. I echo what Councillor Jarvis and both of the councillors please say about this. I have not managed personally to find reasons that I can justify supporting it. Unfortunately, neither can I find any reasons for not supporting it, but my feelings about this is that it is a development that shouldn't happen for many reasons, and I won't be supporting it.
Thank you. Members, I'm sorry, I should have drawn your attention to the memorandum on the table in front of you. I hope you've all seen it and had an opportunity to understand it. Has anyone not? Councillor Hayfield?
Thank you, Chair. I'm always keen to try and support local members when there's clearly something that they feel quite strongly about, and they clearly do. What I'd like your advice on, Chair, please, is what you've heard of the local members saying. What is there in terms of a defendable reason for refusal that you've heard that would enable me to support the local members in refusing us?
Oh, thank you for putting me on the spot.
That's the idea, Chair.
I think I heard from Councillor Clues that his reason for proposing refusal was that the application is contrary to the policy in the borough plan on neighbour amenity.
That's correct. That's correct. That's the reason.
Anyone else wish to speak? Mr. Brown? Sorry, I don't want to wake you up there, Mr. Brown.
No, you've got the microphone on, Stuart. Just a couple of things. First of all, to make a correction to what Councillor Giles is saying, the level here of the house, members saw this on the site. It was specifically pointed out to members on the site that the level of the lawn that we saw on site would be the level of the house. It will not be built up. The gradient will come down from Nursery Road into the site. So the house would not be built up. Secondly, in respect of the wall, there is a paragraph on page 5B80 which makes this absolutely explicit. It might be a non-designated asset, but the applicant is free to take that wall down without any consent whatsoever. And that is a material fallback position, that he could take that wall down tomorrow. He would not require any consent from this authority to do so. I'm making that absolutely clear, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chairman. I just find this really difficult. It's a really difficult balance here. I do understand the residents. I understand why this application would be so unpopular. But I like Councillor Hayfield, I'm struggling with a planning reason. And if we refuse without a planning reason and it's appealed, we lose control altogether. And we have to accept that Highways has said that they've no objection. And indeed, they've claimed that the new entrance is safer for the people in the close. Now, you may disagree with that, but that is what Highways' assessment is. And it's really difficult for a planning committee to go against that. You've just heard from Mr. Brown that the wall isn't an issue because it could come down anyway, whether we refuse it or not. My concern, my one remaining concern is the levels, the difference in levels. And I was concerned when I went on the site visit. I did go and I looked and I was trying to imagine the road coming in on the gradient it would have to be to meet the levels that are there. And I do have some concern about whether that can be done easily. Now, again, Highways seem to think it can be, but I'm a little bit worried about that. I am finding this application extremely difficult to judge. It's purely on planning terms. I do understand why residents would object, but we can't just object without planning reasons because it will be appealed and we will lose. So I'm really conflicted on this one, Chairman. But I'm happy to listen to anyone else that wants to speak. Thank you.
Councillor Johns.
Just one slight comment from what Mr. Brown said. I was aware that the house, where the housing platform was, and my quotations for saying where the water goes is because of the building up from the top of the garden to Nursery Road.
Thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Again, Councillor Bell, I have an issue with this because I'm looking at the amenities and the only thing that I've got circled in the whole report is that we need to avoid and address unacceptable impact. On the next page, it says there's no significant. Now, my argument could be, well, what is significant if you don't live there? It's quite easy for us to say that it's not significant when we're not next door to it. For me, I believe that any development next door to you is enough to affect your livelihood. I think it is enough to change the way that you live. And I think that we have to take that into account. I think it's a hard one, but I will support the local councillors as they know their area on this, and I will support them. But I think that is the only option we have here on refusal is the amenity side.
Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Chair. My comments are around the amenity of the area. Without doubt, that wall forms a significant part of the character of the area. Without any doubt, it dominates the end of the close. I totally agree with everything that's been said about needing to find planning reasons for an objection. And I understand the strength of feeling from the residents who live in the close and their concerns about road safety and about the changes of levels, particularly where vehicles are moving in and out of the proposed drive. At the moment, Chair, I feel that the amenity argument carries weight.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Officers, any comments or guidance? In which case, I've heard a proposal that planning permission is refused and seconded on the basis that it is contrary to our policy on neighbourhood amenity. Can I see those in favour of refusal? Those against? And abstentions? Planning permission is refused. As with our previous application, we can adjourn for a few minutes if members would, members of the public would like to leave us. But again, you are more than welcome to stay. So members, we now move on to application number 695 for Highfield Farm, Farthing Lane, Kirkland. We have one speaker on this item, Mr. Eunice. Mr. Eunice, if you take the chair, rather easier to walk about now than it was before. Mr. Brown will introduce his report now, forming you to speak. Mr. Brown.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just move on the slides. Again, this was a further deferral from the last meeting. Members are familiar now with the site, Highfield Farm, the main house here, the sheds, the wooden sheds, and the residential development off Farthing Lane, which is this road here. In terms of the site visit, there's a note attached to the appendix, but those members that didn't attend the site visit, then we actually parked cars here and went all the way down into the village, and particularly down here to a couple of bends, look at the properties here to see the distance away of these properties from the house. And then we went back to the house, had a good look around the parking area here, and then had and we were invited to go inside the house so that members could see both the ground floor and the first floor as it exists. And members will be familiar with that from last time, where the parking areas are shown. The report, Mr. Chairman, it obviously attaches the previous report as an appendix. And as you can see, Mr. Chairman, there's a clarification on a couple of points on the main report, 1, 2 and 3 on page 5C 102, which have been raised. In terms of the recommendation, Mr. Chairman, then clearly the recommendation is for approval. But as was mentioned last time, one of the matters that was raised by yourself, I think, Mr. Chairman, was that there needs to be some sort of dialogue in the case of a difference of opinion between the residents and the applicants. Now, the recommendation suggests a community liaison group. That is an option. There are other options open for this particular dialogue. The parish council has indicated in the last few days they will not be calling a public meeting. So therefore, Mr. Chairman, there's simply something probably informal is the best arrangement here. But I'll leave that recommendation to members, Mr. Chairman, if in fact the overall principle of the development is accepted as per the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Hughes, welcome to the meeting. It says on my notes that you'll be accompanied by Mr. Chaudhry. Mr. Chaudhry, you're welcome to join your colleague. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to exclude you. It's just my inadequacy in reading the notes I've been given with you. You're both very welcome. Mr. Chaudhry.
Good evening. You've seen probably the earlier speakers tonight, and I know you're attending on previous occasions. So you'll be given 3 minutes in which to address the board. So I'll tell you when your 3 minutes start, when you have 1 minute remaining, and then when your time's up. 3 minutes starts.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members of the board. Well, we're grateful for having this opportunity to come back again.
Regarding the concerns that were raised last time, we did volunteer ourselves to for further liaison, but no one approached us. And we have constantly volunteered this with the local public, with the parish council, and no further objections have been raised. In terms of the concerns that were raised previously, there were some impressions. There were the kind of items that we wanted to clarify. If there are any impressions taken from the application, but unfortunately, nothing came through for that as well. But we are one of the items that has been increased in this report was that we should form a liaison group. We are happy to continuously have a dialogue with the local residents and attend parish council meetings. And if that seems to be necessary, we have no objection to that. The other objections that were raised in terms of the traffic impact, the impact on the highways or the safety, then the relevant authorities have not raised any concerns in regards to that. We don't intend to enter the village because the location where we situated, it is to the northeast of the village, so we don't really have any direct impact as such. The nearest property, again, it's about 75 meters away from where we're situated. So we don't see how we can have any adverse impact to any of the locals. But if there are any concerns from the local public, we are more than happy to continuously proceed with our communications. And if it's deemed necessary, we are happy to attend parish council meetings when it's needed. I think that's pretty much in summary. Other than that, I don't see any objection that has been raised.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hughes. Members, do you have any questions for our speaker? Sorry, Councillor Parsons.
Yeah, could you remind us of the age range of the children that you're indicating?
The age we targeted is from 12 to 25 years old.
Thank you.
My only comment, Mr. Hughes, is that thank you very much for your comments earlier on regarding the community liaison group. These are normally fairly informal things, and it can include or exclude borough councils or parish councils. But I think it would be a good idea if you're happy with that. There are two borough councillors for Girdleford. I am one. Councillor Mrs. Sanders Smith is another. As Mrs. Smith isn't here, I'm more than happy to volunteer her to join the liaison group. But we can both take part. But thank you very much indeed. Members, any comments, questions, proposals? Councillor Riley.
Thank you, Chair. I was until recently representative for Girdleford. And I can understand the concerns that local residents are expressing about like developments. Indeed, we had similar development within Ward Rawton 3 or 4 years ago where there was much community opposition. However, experience of living in the community with the development operating has proven that there have been no problems over that period. I think that the proposal around a community consultation group or co-management group is an excellent idea. And I would encourage that members consider that as part of their approval. And did include invites to the parish council as well as to local members representing community, and hopefully all parties will find a way of ensuring that the establishment operates on a successful basis. On that element, I would propose make a second proposal that the permission tonight should be for a shorter term, perhaps 5 years, which would be reviewable at the end of the planning period. So 2 recommendations. First of all, to support the consultation group, and then secondly, a proposal that this be a temporary permission running perhaps up to 5 years.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, any comments?
I'll just repeat government advice, Mr. Chair, which I've done on several occasions when the temporary condition is suggested. Government advice is not to follow that route, and there's a specific reason for that, with evidence that can back that up. And secondly, the actual conditions go as far as I think as I could go in that respect, because this would be a personal consent to this particular operator. And therefore, if the operator changed, that would be time to review the activity. So it's operator related rather than time related. And I think that's probably from my point of view, Mr. Chairman, that's probably the more reasonable route to go from a planning point of view.
But there is nothing in law that says that's not possible.
No, Mr. Chairman, it's just government advice.
Thank you. Councillor Starr.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I know that these types of application cause concern in communities. I had one very similar in my ward, which is Hartsel. And again, I would support what Councillor Riley said, that these concerns do not tend to play out in practice once the facility's in there. And I did go on the site visit, and it does look like an ideal place actually for this type of facility. And I think so. I would support the 5 years, and the reason I would give is to build confidence in the community, so the community do get confidence that this facility can work well and not affect them. And in Hartsel again, we set up a liaison group which helped enormously. And I think if the community feel that they've got a direct communication with someone, if there are any problems, then I think it does help. So I'm more than happy to second Councillor Riley's proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Hayfield.
Yes, just to trot out my experience again in Forlongley, the three of them in Forlongley, or there were, one just down the lane from me, one on the Nuneaton Road, and one on the Coventry Road. And I bet a lot of excitement at the time, and I bet most people in Forlongley have forgotten it even exists now. There's been no problems whatsoever.
Councillor Parsons.
Thank you, Chair. I have to echo what's been said. Having partaken in the site visit, the property did strike me as being utterly ideal to be converted for this purpose. It was an excellent property, and like I have experience of a home literally at the end of my garden. Group Homes had several properties in Polesworth, and I have to say I went with concerned neighbours to voice my concerns, which proved to be utterly, totally and absolutely groundless. In 40 years that's been there and I've been there. And in fact, Group Homes is now a very much treasured part of Polesworth. And I look forward to this becoming a similar institution and a similar place. I am concerned about the 5-year situation because if this property is going to be converted to this purpose, then it needs to be converted properly. And I believe if you put a 5-year tenure on it, then that makes the investment in order to do that properly a little bit questionable. And we put that at risk. I would see that as a concern. I see the offer of community liaison as being very much part and parcel of this, but obviously it's being offered, but it has to be accepted, and people have to engage and enter the dialogue. I have no hesitation in supporting the application as it stands. Thank you.
Councillor Dulwich, I'm sorry if I've got the order wrong. I was really going left to right.
Doesn't matter.
I thought it was an opportunity to argue in front of him.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I missed site visit. I had COVID, but I would have been interested to see what the problems were around this site. I echo most of the comments that councillors have already put forward, particularly the ones about continuity. I think it is very important for the sorts of clients with all that you are going to be dealing with here, that you have continuity. Apart from the economic arguments, I think that is a separate argument. I think that you need to give these people stability and surety of what is going to happen to them. One of the criticisms of the system that we used to have was that at 18, anybody that was in care was basically pushed out and had to stand on their own 2 feet without support. Over the years, that has changed, as some of the councillors across the other side there know very well. And it appears to me that what this offers is to continue that continuity, not really good English, sorry. If this is supported, and I personally think that it should be, but if it is, I don't think that we should be limiting it to 5 years, because I don't think that is fair on you as investors or on your clients who will be living there. I think we should give it full planning permission as suggested by Mr. Brown.
Anybody else wish to make any comments? I'm sorry, I can't invite you to speak. You've had your 3 minutes. I'm sorry about that. Councillor Ryan?
If I may come back on the 5 years, Chair, I still think it's a reasonable request, recognising the statements that Councillors Parsons and Derricks have made. We're dealing with an application here which is causing public concern. And the whole desire of both the applicant and the community is to work together to ensure that they reach acceptable conclusions. A temporary planning permission does not mean that the service would have to cease after the 5 year period, not at all. They would make application to extend the planning application. And should the service have run without any problems over the 5 years, then I can see no reason why this board wouldn't grant permanent consent there. So it's just to speak again in support of my proposal that the condition around 5 years be placed on this application.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Members, if I could speak to you now as one of the members of Curdworth rather than as the chairman, so I'm not trying to give you any direction, I'm merely making a personal comment. Along with everyone else, I went to the site visit and I was significantly assured by what we saw. I think that this will be a very well-run group. I see no question in that, and I am content from what I've read, as indeed I believe the parish councillors, because they are not currently raising any objection. Notwithstanding that, there are several members of the community who are concerned. I think personally that the liaison group will go a long way to doing that, and I think backing that up with a 5 year consent will. So I personally, I can see, if you like, as ever, both sides of this, but I am persuaded more that this is a use that will be valuable for the community, but to give the objectors some degree of comfort, 5 year consent, I think, is appropriate. Councillor Humphries.
I'm just listening to what Mr. Brown had to say. The guidelines are that you do it by the owners of the businesses in terms of a control rather than as a temporary consent. So that if we go for a 5 year temporary permission, what does that leave us open to flying in the face of what the guidelines are that it should be a full consent? I'd be interested what Mr. Brown's going to say.
Well, it's, I think, a question of law, so we'll go to Mr. Tobin first.
Chair, it is guidance, which means therefore it doesn't bind totally. But bear in mind that it's guidance and the fact that you have to take account of that balanced against all other material factors. You will need to satisfy yourself that, or yourselves as a board, that alternative methods of dealing with that issue would not be appropriate and for this situation. So if you can satisfy yourself of a reason, detailed reason for that, then you could not follow that guidance. But it has to be some reasoning behind that, because there's another alternative has been suggested as part of the recommendation. And if you see this as being more appropriate to get to work better, and you can explain why, then that will probably stand up scrutiny. So if you're not convinced that that's the case, then the more appropriate line would be to follow the guidance.
Let me just challenge you a little bit on that, Mr. Tobin. This is a personal consent. Are you suggesting in the determination of an extension to include other parties, if the application were merely to change from one operator to another, that the board is able to reconsider the whole of the application as opposed to merely the question in front of them, which is a change from one operator to another?
That's not what's being proposed.
I was talking about if we went with the suggestion of the personal consent only.
Yeah, because it would then be a fresh application.
On the strength of merely the change in personal consent.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brown, anything to add?
No, Mr. Chairman, we have used conditions in the past where you actually combined a personal condition with a temporary consent. That's another option that you have. But at the end of the day, Mr. Chairman, it's that, as Mr. Turner said, it's up to the members to balance the considerations and come to a judgment, a planning judgment, as to where they feel the balance lies.
Thank you, members. Councillor Gosling?
It's only a quick query. I would quite happily support the 5 years as a safety measure to find out and to be able to review it in time. If we can seek assurances that it doesn't affect the sustainability or the deliverability or even the quality of deliverability of the projects, we wouldn't want to sacrifice that in order to kind of have guarantees for the 5 years.
Thank you. Councillor Clue?
It's just one quick question. When the 5 year comes up, are they to put a fresh, complete application in, which would bear cost to them? Or would it be just, yes, if you're 5 years up with at no cost, or would they have to still pay for a new application?
Thank you. I've got two questions. I'll just go round and then we'll let Mr. Brown answer the whole lot. I think it's Councillor Hayfield.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm getting a little confused now. From what I've heard around the room, we all like the application, we all want it to go ahead, and we all want it to succeed. Where I'm getting confused is what we want to put in place to satisfy the objectors, and that's the bit I haven't quite got my head around yet. The liaison group, I had a little at all, but the 5 year consent, I need a little bit more convincing on that.
Councillor Hancock?
I don't think the argument for the 5 years on the side that we're saying that we shouldn't do 5 years because of the service. They have a right to provide the medical service they're there to provide. It doesn't matter what we give 5 years or not, they still have a right by law to provide the service that they are advertising to do. So that's not an argument. The argument here is, for all members, in my point is, do we feel that this application should just be given full consent and let's get on with it, or we should give 5 years? I don't think 5 years at any point has a question on the service that the applicant has to provide. That is written. Once we give consent of anything, they must provide the service. So I don't think the 5 years is a question on the service. I think it's merely, again, if we want to appease some of the objectors and give a time limit. That for me is the only question.
Thank you. Councillor Jones?
Thanks, Chair. Just listening to all of the statements, it seems as all of the units like this in the area have proved any concerns have proved to be for fruitless. The 5 year doesn't sit very comfortable with me, because if you're looking at it for 5 years and saying, okay, you'll check the performance, surely there's a statutory body that does that anyway in that area.
Councillor Jones, we're talking about planning consent, not statutory.
Yeah, no. The 5 year is, I say, looking at a fallback position, that if there's a problem at 5 years, it can be reviewed. I think there'll be a continual review of it anyway. And the 5 year just doesn't sit comfortable with me at the moment.
Councillor Jarvis, there is no continual review of planning consent. You can't.
No, a continual review. I'll say like there is, like there is an offset in the schools.
No, you must not get confused of the issues here. This is not a question of performance. It's a question of a planning consent, full planning consent, but for a limited period. And the suggestion was that would then give local residents a greater opportunity to become more comfortable with the use. It's not a question over the performance of the facility.
Okay, accept that, Chair. But the 5 years still doesn't sit comfortable with me.
Councillor Parsons.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Jarvis. It doesn't sit comfortably with me either. And I'd just like to raise the question of what in the business world, what a business would consider if they were told, well, yeah, you can settle, but you've got 5 years and then you've got to look at it all again. And I don't think that many business plans would take that into consideration. I don't think it's a fair requirement. I understand the objections and the worries of the neighbours, and the age range doesn't always help that. But actually, you know, people have needs and special needs, and those needs are deemed by the nation to continue until the age of 25 and to be considered and serviced until that age. And all of us who served on the county council know that. And I think, well, I just believe that this isn't really a fair starting point for this business and for this service. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Tobin, you were indicating you want to say something?
I think it was just on the point that Councillor Jarvis was making, but I think you clarified that when you responded.
And Mr. Brown, I'm sorry, I didn't come back to you. So it's Councillor, sorry, I didn't see. Councillor Binding?
Certainly, Chair.
My apologies.
I was only going to make an observation on the back of Councillor Parsons' latest comments. I would refer him to the application by KSD Recycling, which is 100 metres away from this applicant's site, where permission has recently been granted by County Council for a 10-year temporary application. That serves a national recycling need. However, in view of local opposition, local concerns, and the spirit of working together, the County Council have imposed a 10-year temporary application.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Misspell?
Yeah, I mean, I think the point being that those of us that have had this type of facility know that there are no trouble. There's no trouble. So it's not a matter of 5 years and that's it. We don't expect this facility to stop after 5 years. We expect there to be no trouble. I think we may need to be more specific about what happens at the end of 5 years. It is, you know, if there's not outrage in the community or however we wish to put it, then, you know, planning permission is there. We need to be really clear about that. I am more concerned about the personal aspect of this, only because of the continuity of service for those that are receiving the service. So let's say, I'm sure it's not in their plans, but let's just say the current applicants wanted to sell within 2 years, and it's all got to come back to us then as a full application. And we've already got people in there who are relying on that service. So if we're going to go with 5 years, I would like to see that condition taken out, actually, because I think it's more disruptive than the 5 years. But I think we need to be specific what happens at the end of 5 years. What happens? Is it just a matter of they come and say, look, we've had no objections over 5 years, can you just sign it off? But I don't know what the process is, but somebody could explain.
Thank you, Councillor. As I understand it, at the end of 5 years, an application will be made in the normal normal course of events, and the board would have the opportunity to review planning policy. But the material factor would be that there is an extant consent, which is only limited by the 5-year consent or the personal conditions. The advice we've been given in the past is that if there is no material change, if there is no material level of objection, then there is no reason to refuse consent. Many times in the past, it's been made clear to me that a 5-year consent is not a temporary consent. It's full planning application, but limited to 5 years. Mr. Brown, anything to add?
Nothing really, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of points to reiterate a matter that Councillor Jarvis raised. Other members have referred to similar cases in their own wards, Hartshill and Forlongley. I mean, both those cases we had objections, Mr. Chairman, but there were no temporary consents. They were personal consents. So therefore, the board may want to consider consistency in this particular view. And secondly, in terms of the application process at the end of the 5 years, a fresh application would be necessary, as you say, Mr. Chairman. and then all the material considerations that affect any particular application will have to be reconsidered. But one of the main issues will be evidence from the community and evidence from the applicant as to what has happened during the last those previous 5 years.
Mr. Brown, forgive me. The number of times I've heard you and other planning officers say that members should not consider other decisions, other applications, they should treat each application on its merits. Are you now changing your guidance that we should think about other applications and decide what happened there for the sake of consistency?
No, Mr. Chairman, what I'm saying is that members have actually referred to cases very similar to this, with similar application, where objections were received and planning permissions were granted without these conditions. Therefore, I agree that every application is determined on its own merits, but there has to be some degree of consistency in decision making.
I think we can all agree with that one. Councillor Clue.
Just referring to my last question that I asked. So when the 5 years is up, the applicant has to put a full application in at his cost.
Yes.
That is correct.
Yeah.
So it's got to start all over again.
Well, it's hardly all over again, but
Well,
yes,
the same application is going to cost him again to put a fresh application in.
Yeah. So members, I think.
So I just apologise for interrupting, Chair. Just one further brief comment to make. As you indicated, if you do determine as a board to grant a time-limited planning permission, as you mentioned, Chair, the permission ends at that period. Equally, if a further application is made of the same type, so obviously, as long as it doesn't vary, the existing planning permission carries weight, and obviously then whether there's been issues with how that is played out in practice would also carry weight. So the key point is that the board has to satisfy itself that that's the best way, and provided you are satisfied that's the better way than the conditions that are suggested, then that would be open to the board. Of course, that's a matter for your own balance and judgment.
Thank you. So members, I've seen a proposal which recommends consent subject to a 5-year time limit. I've heard a lot of other people, but no other proposals. Is there another proposal? Councillor Parsons?
I would like to propose that we give full permission.
Seconded by?
I'll second that.
Thank you. So we'll take the latter application first. Also, the latter proposal. This is granting consent as recommended, I think, is what you're saying in the papers. Are you including the community liaison group?
Yes.
So, members, all those in favour of that proposal? And those against? That falls until the planning consent is granted. We now move on to application number 698, Ardenview Town Road, Colombo. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So open up the slides again. As the members can see from the form, Mr. Chairman, this is unusual in terms of reference to you. It's because the recommendation is contrary to the response from statutory constancy. And that's explained in the committee report, but I think the best explanation can be from the actual plans themselves. The property itself, Mr. Chairman, is on the way into Flongley as you're coming in from the Arley direction. It's just on a small stretch of road before you get to the bends as you come in on that particular road. As you can see from the plan in front of you, it's a small bungalow at the present time. Front elevation here, top left, proposed to be slightly increased and altered, as you can see, with the equivalent alterations at the rear and the side. I can move on. Let me. Doesn't want to run. It's frozen. Space button. Oh, I see. Please, Mr. Chairman. It's frozen. Sorry, Mr. Chair, coming, as I said, the explanation is probably better in terms of the actual showing on the plan rather than the written word. You've got the existing bungalow here on the right, with the proposal on the left with the change to the frontage. The existing is as you can see here, is the gates right on the back of the pavement. The sliding gates are here, set back slight way from the back of the pavement. The Highway Authority have asked that the gates, any gates, are 5.5 metres back from the back of the pavement. Back of the pavement is here. This is almost 2 metres back. If you take it back 5.5 metres, you're back here. That's, as you can see, it's quite a distance back. That's to enable a car to stand off the highway, and the Highway Authority is saying the highway includes the pavement and the road. So a car would stand off there. But as you can see, if a car does park there, some gates here. In short, Mr. Chairman, there's not enough room even to turn around into the parking area, let alone go to the garage back. So as the committee report makes it quite clear, the reason for going against the highway advice here, as the highway design engineering advice, is the practicality of the impracticality of actually working that particular system or working that arrangement, Mr. Chairman. And therefore, Planning Commission is being recommended here for approval, subject to the conditions, which basically the plans that you can see in front of you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Members, any comments? Thank you, Councillor Hancock. Anyone? Seconded. It's been proposed and seconded. Councillor Jarvis.
Question that these are gates set so far back from the highway, and obviously the highways like to be able to get out, open your car, open gates without the back end sticking on the road. Could it be that these are electric gates, so as soon as you drive up to them, they open, let you in and shut behind you, which would negate some of the time where the back end of your car's on the road?
That's not the problem, Mr. Chairman. The problem is if the gates are 5.5 metres back from the pavement, there's no room between the gates and the bungalow to actually pull into the site. So the car
where they are now.
The car currently has to be parked on the access.
Have them automatic, so you drive up to them, they open, let you in.
You couldn't enter, Councillor Jarvis, because the gates would be so close to the bungalow, you couldn't actually enter through the gates.
Now leave the gates where your sketch is now.
Mr. Stokes, is there any provision in planning law for us to specify whether gates are manual or electric?
As long as it's a reasonable condition, you know, the thing is obviously it's being able to make sure that it's enforceable and it's working in practice. And that's the issue of any condition. How you'll be able to monitor and enforce that.
It's not enforceable.
Yes.
The gates, so I'm helping, Mr. Chairman, the gates as proposed on the plan I showed you are actually sliding gates, electric sliding gates.
Oh, okay.
So they will open.
They will open, yeah.
So therefore, in terms of granting the planning permission, it will work.
That's exactly what I was going to check. I was thinking that there were manual gates, so you've got to get your car, leave your car sticking over the road. They're electric gates, you drive up, they open, they let you in. Jobs are good.
The Highway Authority want that arrangement pushed further back.
Councillor Hancock.
First back from the bungalow.
From the back of the pavement.
Yeah, can we not? Yes, thank you.
I've had a proposal that the consent be granted, which has been seconded. Anyone in favour? Those against? Thank you very much. That's granted. We now move to application number 22/161 for land 100 metres to the west of Ham's Garden Cottage, Marston. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll let Councillor Riley lead first.
Speak quietly.
When you're ready, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The location plan here shows the wider Hams Hall area. Lee Marston is up here to the right. The main line, railway line here, north is on the right-hand side, just to make the plan a bit different. The site is here. The hatched area. Sorry, I beg your pardon, Mr. Chairman. The site area is here. this rectangle here, which is the former tennis courts. The church, which was referred to, is here, and the cross, which is referred to in the report, is on the front here. And the access road that goes up to Lee Marston is up through here. And you can see the relationship between the Hams Hall development, but it's the key thing is the wooded area here, the church, the former tennis courts, and the playing field, which members saw when we were dealing with the applications down here. And there's a bit more detail, Mr. Chairman. The church, the cross, as you can see here, the Tame Valley Wetlands Centre here, and the former tennis courts here, on which the containers would be proposed. As you can see from the report, Mr. Chairman, in this particular case, this is something that probably is worth supporting because it does raise, it does lead to the reclamation of historic and conservation materials as a result of the HS2 project, which can be reused locally, and those materials have to be stored somewhere, and therefore this particular application seeks a temporary consent for those storage containers. It raises greenbelt issues, heritage issues, because the church and what is here, we are recommending a temporary consent, mainly because this is reversible. It is just the placement of containers on the former tennis court line. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Move the recommendation.
Can I just say this is one temporary consent I would like to support.
Oh, I'd like to hear the Councillor Duffin?
I was going to second the recommendation.
Saw another hand.
I was only going to second.
Lots of seconds.
Members, I've had a proposal seconded 1,000 times. All those in favour of granting consent on a temporary basis? Those against? Thank you very much. That's granted. Would somebody like to encourage him to return? Members, we now move on to application 651 for land 350 metres northwest of Marwood Bungalow, Astley, and land off North Farm Parkway, Astley. There are two applications, members. You are entirely encouraged to consider them separately. And when we get to the votes, I will ask you to vote separately for each application. They are reported to you for convenience because they are largely the same issue. It's better to draw the issues together, but these are separate applications and we will be asked to vote separately for them. We do have speakers, the first of which is Pamela Ward, who will speak to us on, Paula Ward, who will speak to us on Teams. But in advance of that, Mr. Brown, would you like to introduce your report, specifically identifying any difference between the two applications?
Let me just go through the slides first, Mr. Chairman. There's already been a report coming to you on both the applications, and therefore the slides that I have here are replications of what you've seen before. But just in terms of reminders, before I come back to the point you've made, the application down here is Smorrel Lane. Smorrel Lane is the road here that goes into Bedworth, and the M6 motorway down here, the M6 services here. Breach Oak Lane, where the residents have objected from, are here, and that particular application site is there, with the connection through to the grid up here in Astley Lane. The other application is some distance away, as you can see, just south of New Arley. Astley Gorse, which is referred to in the report, is this woodland here, and the village of Astley and Astley Castle is here. Members did do a site visit, and there's a note of that attached to the report. And for the sake of those members that didn't attend, then we spent some time down on this particular site, walking along the footpath here. We came down Breach Oak Lane, walked along Smorrel Lane, so that you can look at the site from here and where the proposed access is which I'll show you here. Then in Astley, we actually looked at the access here and then walked down this particular footpath so we can look across the site. We then came all the way around to Sycamore Crescent in Arley, which is here, and then walked down this particular boundary, which is close to the footpath, which runs immediately adjacent to the site here, and got a very good and clear view to that particular site. So, Mr. Chairman, in terms of the Smorrel Lane site, Breach Oak Lane is here, Smorrel Lane is along here, motorway service area down here with the houses down here, as I've already said. The site, as you can see, is an array of solar panels. The agricultural building is down here in the corner, surrounded by the existing vegetation, which would be enhanced, and the existing hedgerow, quite strong hedgerow and treed area here, would also be expanded and enhanced as indicated in the report. The access to the site would be from here, which is adjacent to Great Limes Wood, which members saw on the site visit, and the battery storage areas will be here next to the wood, a little bit more detail here, and again the details of the agricultural building. I won't run through these, Mr. Chairman, as they're piece before, apart from just going back to that one, which is the agricultural building. As you can see, it's quite low level. It's covers quite a large area in terms of footprint, but it's quite low level with a very shallow roof, which would be covered with sedum, as is indicated in the report. And in terms of the other sites, again, there's 4 or 5 fields here. The hedgerow boundaries will all be retained, together with a large number of ponds that are on the site, and some tree clumps, which members saw on their site visit. The footpath that we walk down is here, and the other footpath is over here, with the access coming onto Astley. Sorry, not to Astley Lane here at Astley. In terms of the differences between the two sites, Mr. Chairman, then clearly there's this particular site which I'm looking at the moment, as the report indicates, is set in far more open land. Very, very few residences around. The closest residence will be in Astley, Sycamore Crescent, and a couple of farmhouses down here on Park Lane. In terms of the previous application, as already indicated, there's a substantial number, a significant number of more houses down frontage to Breach Oak Lane, together with Smorrel Lane here, and of course on the other side of the valley, which some of which actually overlook the site. In terms of size, they're roughly comparable. In terms of the actual associated infrastructure, they're comparable for all intents and purposes. The key difference with this application is the agricultural building, which members can have more. There's more information on that actually in the report. The report, Mr. Chairman, goes through each application separately, as you've indicated. There's a large number of issues. I do need to bring attention to the difference of opinion that we have on archaeology under the heritage impacts on both applications. There's an extensive series of paragraphs on both applications, mainly because the county planning archaeologist has objected to both. The planning archaeologist considers that all of the sites, or the whole of both sites, should be trial trenched. And as you can see from the report, that there's been limited trial trenching, but that trial trenching has been focused on the main areas of change. And you can see from the report what the evaluation was, or what the findings were from those trenches. However, the county archaeologist still objects, and we've gone into some detail, Mr. Chairman, as to the planning basis, if the support has been given to that objection, both our own local plan policy, LP 15, and paragraph 194 of the MPPF. Our view, Mr. Chairman, is that sufficient information has come in, and that's based on a survey of historical records. It's based on a walkover and geophys survey of the site. It's also based on the trial trenching that has been undertaken. That we consider to be proportionate, given the nature of the substrata here, which is indicated in the report, and also the nature of the application, which does not include large and extensive foundations. I have to go through that, Mr. Chairman, because it's as I say, it's a statute consultee, and we're not accepting his full advice. We are, however, saying that conditions are necessary. Those conditions should be pre-commencement and not predetermination. You'll see, Mr. Chairman, that there are conditions set out for both. We are still in discussion with the applicant in relation to the noise issues, and particularly the one at Breach Oak Lane, where in fact there are obviously the houses next to it. We've suggested conditions, Mr. Chairman, on the advice of our environmental health officer. The applicant disagrees with the content of those conditions, and the negotiations are still continuing. The final point, Mr. Chairman, is that, as the report makes absolutely clear, and the applicants, both applicants agree with this. If the board is minded to support these two proposals, they will have to be referred to the Secretary of State under the 2009 direction to see if he wishes to call them in for public inquiries. I think that's it, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure members will have questions of the applicants because they can answer more technical questions than I can.
Mr. Brown, can you just remind me specifically which conditions are the subject of ongoing negotiation?
If we go to the first application, which is Small Lane, Breach Oak Lane, Mr. Chairman, then that's the site, Mr. Chairman, which in fact we are still negotiating a noise condition on. In the second application, there's a condition relating to noise, and that is on page 5F/166. It's quite a detailed condition. It's condition number 15. And I'm advised by an environmental health officer that a similar condition is being recommended to us or to you on the previous application, Mr. Chairman. So the condition which is in dispute at the moment is the noise condition, and that is condition 15 on page 5F/166.
Mr. Chairman, noise condition strike me as pretty fundamental to this application. Your legal guidance as to the board in terms of trying to determine an application where the conditions are not clear.
I agree. I mean, I don't know if perhaps Mr. Brown can assist in terms of how far that process has gone, but it would seem appropriate for both applications to have a condition dealing with noise. Obviously, the specific details, the noise levels, etc., are likely to vary because they're different sites and possibly different sorts of operation. I would say that for members to make a decision if they are concerned about noise, to have no provision in place, I think it may be something that we want to have back before you when you have more information on that point.
Mr. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The actual noise condition 15 has been recommended to us by the Environmental Health Officer based on the information which the applicant sent to us and his own understanding of the noise conditions at that particular site. They are very clear, they are very precise, they're very technical, and the notes attached later on the recommendation actually give some definitions to that. The applicant is saying, and they may wish to take this further, Mr. Chairman, when they speak, it's saying that that should be a much looser condition. In other words, that it should be agreed through a noise assessment undertaking later on and not at this particular point in time.
I'm sorry, I'm getting lost with this. If the board votes for this recommendation, I accept it's and minded to support. So ultimately, the Secretary of State will be guiding us in terms of what the condition is. But I think the board has an absolute right to clarity. So from what I understand, conditions such as this have to be agreed with the applicant. If the applicant has not agreed the condition, I don't see clarity.
That's correct, Mr. That is correct, Mr. Chairman. The applicant has not agreed this particular condition. That's why there's an ongoing discussion. And if it is referred off to the Secretary of State, then if there's an agreed condition, then those will be placed in front of the Secretary of State. If there is disagreement about the conditions, which there still can be, then the Secretary of State will be asked to make a decision.
Members, let's move to our speakers, and then we'll come back to this issue. Our first speaker is Paula Ward. Welcome to the meeting. Could you just for the avoidance of doubt, Ms. Ward, tell us which application you are speaking against?
I'm speaking against the Breach Oak Lane Small Lane site.
Thank you very much.
Chairman, I didn't catch that.
Breach Oak Lane, the first one.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Mr. Tobin?
Good evening, Ms. Ward. I I don't know if you saw any of the earlier applicants who were speaking on applications, but just to assist you, I'll explain the process. You'll be given 3 minutes to address, and I will tell you when that 3 minutes starts. I'll tell you when the 1 minute remaining, and I'll tell you when the time's in.
Yes, thank you.
Your 3 minutes starts now.
I would urge the committee to refuse the planning application before them this evening for the Cawley Solar Farm in Breach Oak Lane. Planning has been submitted under the guise it is temporary and that the land will be restored to farming land. However, with the factory unit on the site, this will not be the case. The impact on the local area will be huge. Increased traffic flow, noise and light pollution 24 hours a day, plus the impact on the local wildlife. As well, the impact on the 21 families whose homes are immediately opposite the proposed site in Breach Oak Lane, less than 70 metres away from our front doors. And those who live in the bungalows at the beginning of Breach Oak Lane, who will have the factory unit immediately opposite their homes, and who have in the past had planning applications turned down as double-storey extensions went against council guidelines for the area. However, the proposed factory unit is 6 metres high. The impact assessment, as far as we're aware, was carried out in August when hedges and trees were in full leaf. However, 6 months of the year there is no foliage, so we have a full view into the field opposite the homes. The location of the battery storage is of great concern. Its central location on the site and any ensuing health and safety issues surrounding this, and its close proximity to the residents' homes. Whilst we appreciate we do need alternative forms of energy, there are more appropriate sites for these industrial scale solar farms away from local communities. And with the prospect of a global food shortage, then surely repurposing perfectly suitable farming land is a contradiction in terms. We have chosen to live where we do for the beautiful and peaceful surroundings, and we do not wish to live opposite an industrial park. We would urge the committee to please consider carefully all the objections received from local residents, and including that of Cawley Parish Council, and the reasons behind them, and of other proposals of solar farms across the country that have been refused by planning committees, and we hope that you see fit to support your local community by doing the same. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Members, do you have questions on that speaker? There are no questions, so Ms. Ward, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mr. Nick Leaney, who is here in person. Mr. Leaney, if you take the chair. Mr. Leaney, welcome to the meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I think I know, but could you just clarify for us which application you're speaking in favour of?
Speaking in support of the application in Small Lane.
Thank you very much. Mr. Toon.
Mr. Leaney, I know you've probably seen several speakers now, so you probably understand the process. You'll be given 3 minutes in which to address the board. So I'll tell you when your 3 minutes starts, when you have 1 minute remaining, and then when your time's up. Your 3 minutes starts now.
Good evening, councillors. The determination of this application is one of balance, weighing the benefits of the proposal against the likely effects having regard to planning policy and applying the presumption in favour of sustainable development. In addition, this application has to consider the harm to the green belt location, in which the applicant has put forward what are considered to be the very special circumstances needed to outweigh such harm. Clearly, this proposal is sustainable development, providing environmental, economic and social benefits. The solar array addresses the urgent need to reduce GHG emissions whilst providing the wider environmental benefits associated with increased production of energy from renewable sources. The proposed agricultural building, powered by the solar array, will house a vertical farm which will produce leaf crops all year round, going into the local food chain, thus reducing food miles, transport costs and emissions by reducing the need for out-of-season overseas food imports. Vertical farms are highly efficient and positively contribute to the green economy. Vertical farms use no pesticides, no herbicides, and only 4% of the water that would be used in growing the same crop outside. This diversification of agriculture can help farmers afford to offset land for biodiversity and sustainability measures without relying on government subsidy, and will create 30 new green jobs in agriculture at various entry levels, improving skills and opportunities in the local economy. The agricultural land at the site is currently used mainly in arable rotation. it's likely that soil health will be improved over the operational life of the proposal by resting from that rotation. A grazing management plan for the area between and under the solar panels would still allow sheep grazing for the duration of the development. Unlike, say, residential development, the solar array is fully reversible and therefore temporary in nature, an important factor to be taken into account when considering development within the green belt. The topography of this site, which separates it from the surrounding wider area and links it more to the built development to the west and south, results in local rather than broad landscape impacts. Mitigation measures are proposed so as to reduce this local impact further through the enhancement of existing hedgerows, particularly along the western and southern boundaries, as well as new tree planting, resulting in a significant biodiversity net gain being delivered well above the target levels set out by government. Safe road access has been designed from Smorrel Lane. Residential amenity has been demonstrated to be protected from noise and glinter glare impacts. The noise assessment identified the proposed development will operate below the measured day and nighttime background levels in the area at the closest residential receptors. In applying relevant planning policy, it's clear the proposed development is fully compliant. The very special circumstances I've summarised and are set out in the application support this development in the green belt. We therefore respectfully request the application is approved. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Members, do you have any questions for us? Councillor Bell?
Thank you. Yeah, I've got two questions. One, in terms of the objection from the archaeologists, could you just give us some idea of the foundations that are required for the units and for the agricultural building? And my second question is why the objection to the condition on noise?
Thank you very much. For the foundations element, for the grid infrastructure and the batteries, it's a shallow rock foundation that probably goes about 200 mil under the ground, so it stays within pretty much the ploughed context. For the agricultural building is a steel portal frame building, so it's a fairly lightweight structure, even though it does have a cedar roof on the top. Therefore, the foundations will be dependent on ground conditions, but would be no deeper than probably a metre and a half from there. So again, with a deep plough depth and arable of about 400 mil, not greatly below that.
Okay.
On your second point with the noise, it's an important issue, and it's one we're not actually at disagreement with the environmental health officer that we need to have a condition to control noise. It's a matter of making sure that noise condition passes the condition tests which are set out in the MPPF, as we know. There's a British standard 4142 which sets out the methodology for measuring sound at the nearest receptors from developments such as this. Our proposal is to simplify the condition which has been set out by the EHO to say noise strengths will be in line with the measured background noise level set out in the noise report submitted to the application, and if it needs to be verified during any time during operation, it's done in accordance with BS 4142 or its equivalent updated during the lifetime of the operation. So what we're trying to do is actually try and make it a little bit easier as a condition to be enforceable, to be relevant and applicable to this application. So we're not actually a part in terms of it. I also understand it's an operational condition, not a pre-commencement condition. So we're not required to actually agree it with you. If you want to apply it as an operational condition of what the EHO is advising, then that is permitted within that without our permission. I don't know, Mr. Brown wants to just sort of confirm that, but it's only pre-commencement conditions that you're required to agree with us. So to put sort of point forward. But we are agreed we need a noise condition to make it acceptable.
Okay.
Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, it's on this issue of noise. So this board has recently considered two different applications for similar developments where the applicant has agreed to bunding to deal with issues of noise. Have you given any thought to dealing with any noise amenity impacts through the creation of bunding on the development site?
We haven't considered bunding. We've considered it in the design process. So in the first stage of the public consultation, the agricultural building, which has plant next to it, which will have noise emissions, was actually closer to the properties in Breach Oak Lane. We actually moved it following that consultation and the concerns about noise further away to its way. And we also designed the fact that the plant is going to be on the eastern side of the building, which is the far side from Breach Lane. So the building itself will act as a buffer. It's a mitigation effect. So we haven't actually included the bunding. The bunding would actually be, wouldn't actually be necessary. Would it be, because we're not required to do major levelling on the site, we would have to import material to do that. We've also considered where we place the batteries and the grid infrastructure as being the furthest point from residential properties that's practical for the development in terms of minimising cabling disruption and cabling routes. So we've mitigated through design rather than mitigated through attenuation, such as the bunding scheme. And also on that boundary to add, as Mr. Brown said, we've got a substantial boundary of vegetation along Breach Oak Lane, of which we're adding another 10 to 15 metres, and in place up to 20 metres of additional planting there. So that again will act as a means of attenuation on the
for visual, but not noise.
It will act on noise as well. It will act on filter on that.
We've been told previously that planting and trees do not, they do visual mitigation, but they don't do noise mitigation is what I understand, particularly in consultation discussions around HS2.
I'd actually defer to the noise consultants and the HO on that point, but also our point is that we measured on a free-form basis as well in terms of the noise, looking where the noise emission points are and where the receptors are, and we had background noise monitoring done so that we could actually model it, and therefore the modelling actually showed we didn't need to, from our design, needed to provide that attenuation and that mitigation in addition. Take your point.
Any other questions, members? Sorry, Mr. Leaney, I have 3 questions for you. First one, could you tell me what grade of agricultural land this is?
It's a mixture of 3A and 3B. It is 42% 3A, 58% 3B.
Just so members are aware, 3A and 3B are at the lower end of the scale from memory.
They're moderate.
Yeah. So grade 1 is the most important grade.
5.
Thank you. I'm still almost permanently bewildered, but still bewildered over this question of noise. From what I hear now, from what you said, these are conditions which do not apply at the moment. They're not pre-commencement. So you feel, as the applicant, that there is still an opportunity for dialogue to continue, notwithstanding the recommendation in front of the board.
What we suggested to officers is that the condition that's being proposed to the HO could be simplified and still have the same effect. And we've also had discussions with officers that would be happy for a verification survey post-installation as well to ensure that what was actually installed still complies with what we said was going to be installed at the start.
So along the lines that conditions have to be agreed with applicants, are you content for the board to reach a decision based upon the condition in the recommendation?
As I said to Councillor Bell, we're only required to agree pre-commencement conditions. We're not required to, you don't require an applicant to agree to operational conditions. So if you were minded to approve the application and impose the condition that's been suggested by your environmental health officer, that is at your gift to do so. You don't require our permission to do it. We would accept it. We think it still achieves the same aim. It's just we just feel clumsy might be a sort of a harsh word for the EHO, but we just feel that it's not in line with the standard BS 4142 noise condition, which achieves the same aim. But if you mind to do it, we'd be accepting of that.
And my third question is, as you were aware, clearly this application site is in the Greenbelt, where there is a clear obligation for you to set out those special circumstances for the board to go against its normal policy. For the avoidance of any confusion, can you specify to me what your very special circumstances are?
The primary one is one of sustainable development, production of renewable energy, addressing the urgent need to address climate change is the primary one. Another one is providing rural employment and rural diversification for farms at a time when it's challenging for agricultural industry and it's going to continue to be challenging for them. Third one is that we've mitigated through design, as I've been talking about, the impacts of the scheme as they come forward. We feel that the land at the moment it's in arable rotation, it could benefit from being rested and prolonging its life, and it's temporary and reversible. I think a temporary and reversible is another key very special circumstance for the solar farm. And of course the agricultural building itself is not inappropriate development within the green belt. So It's really in regard to the solar farm is the key element, and to which that we propose it's a temporary development, and therefore temporary under planning practice guidance is considered a key material consideration when considering openness in the green belt.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? In which case, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for your time.
Our second speaker is Ms. Kate Cantwell. Cantwell is on Teams. So, Ms. Cantwell, welcome to the meeting.
Hi, thank you. Good evening.
Mr. Tony.
Chair, can I just check that we have two separate proposals which are to be voted on separately. And I know that Mr. Brown's report addressed both of them, but do you want as a board to consider both matters at the same time? I mean, by that I mean after you've heard from the next speaker, or is there an element of risk of various matters which are very similar?
Third question, members, do you want to take a debate and discussion on application 605 for Breach Oak Lane, Corley now, or do you want to hear from our speakers who I presume is speaking in favour of Park Lane Farm now, and take a discussion on both together?
Discuss them both together.
Both together? Are you all happy with that? Okay, Mr. Tony.
Thank you. Good evening. I don't know if you've seen any of the other speakers, but they'll be given 3 minutes in which to address the board. So you'll be given the same period of time. I'll tell
3 minutes begins when we have 1 minute left, and then when 2 minutes. So your 3 minutes begins now.
Sorry, is this me?
It is.
I do apologise. I could hear other voices in the background. Good evening. Thank you for making your site visit. This 40-hectare site would supply up to 30 megawatts to the national grid, providing the annual equivalent of about 5,000 North Warwickshire homes, or offset the equivalent of 2,500 normal car engines. It's notable that with one exception, all consultee objections have been resolved, either by provision of further information or through use of planning conditions, which we've been discussing with the case officer. The question about archaeology is whether members have sufficient information to judge the impact of the development below ground. The case officer and the authors of the heritage report think that on balance there is sufficient evidence contained from a desk-based study, from a site visit that's been undertaken, and from trenching works that have already been done. If we secure consent today, the applicant is also prepared to undertake further trenching works across the site to provide more certainty about below ground impacts. Just 2 public representations have been received, one which said this would not be an eyesore and another which disagreed with that point. The latter also stated that brownfield sites should be prioritised, and while we understand that preference, site selection can only consider areas with a grid connection, with grid capacity, and where land is being offered for the proposed use. The environmental constraints are then carefully considered at that point, and the site boundary and detailed design has been led by good design principles. Jeff Brown's report concludes that, considering planning policy as a whole, the proposal would not conflict with policy objectives. It would therefore be sustainable, and the NPPF reminds us in its opening pages that at its heart there is a presumption in favour of sustainable development. In planning terms, 40 years is not a permanent consent, although it is long term. It's an important distinction to make because it means the underlying classification of the land remains agricultural, and planning conditions can legally require its return to an agricultural use. A 40-year consent would not therefore prejudice the future land use of this site, and it does not make it more likely that other built forms of development would replace it. The objections from the Ramblers Association and CPRE are interesting in that they both accept the long-term climate change benefit, but they consider the shorter-term visual impact of the development to be more serious. We shouldn't confuse visual impact, which might be more obvious in a particular location, with the implications of climate change, which I suggest are actually more serious. The limited adverse visual impacts are in fact reversible. The site avoids North Warwickshire's most protected landscapes. It delivers significant biodiversity gain and agricultural improvements from the 40 years without intensive cultivation.
Well, 3 minutes is up.
That's the 3 minutes up, is it?
It is, yes.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you. Okay.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, do you have any questions for our speaker? Councillor Gosling?
Thank you. I'm just curious because I actually received some of the consultation information about the original site, and the planning application in front of me is extensively larger. And how aware you are, or how much you think you've actually informed the local people of the extent of the new site and the application?
There were other fields originally being considered as part of this development, and that's been refined through the consultation process. So the images that were included in the public consultation were the design as it had reached at that point in time, and things have changed since as more information from our design team has come through and as we completed consultation and took on board comments. I don't think the site's actually got larger though. There's actually fields that have been excluded that were originally under consideration.
Thank you. My concern is that the adaptations haven't been communicated as well as the initial plan was, and I believe that the site is now closer to the residents of Sycamore Crescent.
Sycamore Crescent being New Arley on the northwest boundary.
Yeah, that's correct.
I don't think it is actually closer. Yeah, I don't think it is actually closer than it initially was. I think what members need to consider today is whether or not the plan that's in front of them and the boundaries that are on this final design that has been submitted for the formal local authority consultation process is acceptable or not. It's a natural part of the design process and the consultation processes that certain boundaries change and the position of certain pieces of equipment often changes. And that's as we find out more about the site, for example, where we might need to avoid areas of flooding or avoid protected trees, things like, or where there's specific views that we might not want to open up. And that all goes into the design process and changing the layout to what you see in front of you today.
Any other questions, members? Councillor Lyon?
Did we just get clarification on Councillor Gosling's question?
Oh, I'm going to come to that.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry, which bit have I not answered?
No, it's a technical question. I think that when we've finished with questions to yourself, I'll ask Mr. Brown to bring them back up so that we see what the issue is. Any other questions, Brandon? I have 3 or 4 questions. Apologies. The first one relates to the noise condition. Did you hear Mr. Leany's answer?
Yeah.
Are you in a position, or is it different?
It's the same, and I have actually got the wording of the alternative in front of me that we did suggest back to Mr. Brown and the Environmental Health Officer. If that would help members to have the specific wording we suggested. But, the overall position about the need for our agreement is as Mr. Leany explained.
Thank you. Then could you tell me the quality of the agricultural land that forms this application?
Yes, so on this site there is a small amount of grade 2, which is just 5%. 23% is grade 3A and 69% is grade 3B. The implication being that it's just the total 28%, which is grade 2 and A, which is best and most versatile agricultural land.
Thank you. And could you, as I asked before, it's an obligation upon you to show us what your very special circumstances are if I was to go against Green Belt policy, could you explain to me what you see the very special circumstances of this application are?
Yes, that was actually my last paragraph of the presentation that I didn't quite fit in, so sorry about that. Yeah, we agree that we need to have very special circumstances because it's in the Green Belt. And the argument we want to put forward is that, as the planning officer has concluded, the very limited harms that have been identified in the report are outweighed by the significant and long-term nature of the benefits of the development. Specifically the wider environmental benefits of increasing renewable energy, which is specifically what the NPPF points to as an example of the exemption that's allowable for renewable energy developments. Similar points, well, the same points as Mr. Leaney made, that the site location and the exact site boundary has been designed to try and minimise the amount of high quality agricultural land that's going to be included. So it's less than a third in this case. The supporting reports also demonstrate that as a result of the 40-year fallow period and all the biodiversity net gain improvements, landscape improvements that are proposed, that would actually have a positive impact on the land quality and its what it can contribute economically when it returns to agricultural use. It would improve its water runoff properties because the soil structure is allowed to improve. There's a significant biodiversity net gain that's being secured. Obviously, the employment and economic benefits from enabling this particular landowner to diversify what they do with their land, and the overall meeting the government's recent energy security strategy, which says we need to ramp up deployment of renewable energy, in particular solar.
Thank you very much. Members, any additional questions? In which case, Ms. Cantwell, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Mr. Brown, could you bring the map back up onto the screen so we can clarify the issue that Councillor Gosling raised?
That's probably the best.
It's the fields map, really. There was, because they sent around lovely glossy booklets that came through all of our houses, but it didn't detail any of the land on the New Orley side or any of the impact there. It only had the fields, which are basically surrounded by very busy roads, which were the, I've kind of got this map here, but the fields further south here. And the fields in the north, which are now included, weren't actually consulted on as openly or as widely. Obviously, they've been in the planning documents, but with residents. And this was brought to my attention the other day, and I went back and checked. And I meant to bring along with me the original consultation booklet that they sent around and posted through all of our doors. And it is correct that there was only the southern end that was actually widely advertised and consulted on. It's just the change of that leaves it a little more uncertain.
And just so I'm clear, Mr. Tobin, the obligation of consultation in this regard, whilst it's general, is primarily on the local authority. For us to be clear what the application is, or is it for both parties?
I'm not sure in terms of, I'm not sure I understand that point, Chair. The consultation, this was carried out pre-application by the applicant.
Yeah.
It's not statutory consultation.
That's exactly the point I'm trying to make. The consultation that's required within the Act is what the local authority consults.
That's the statutory.
Yeah. Mr. Brown?
I'll just confirm that, Mr. Chairman, what Mr. Clover has said. In terms of the plan, this is the actual site of the application when it was submitted. In terms of the consultation that we undertook, as Mr. Tobin has said, as a statutory requirement, parish councillors were consulted, and indeed, all the people that backed onto the site along Sycamore Crescent from here to just off the site were also consulted. So members of the public in Sycamore Crescent, who actually whose first floor windows would actually face this site, were all consulted as part of the process. And as has been said in reporting up to now, Mr. Chairman, we've had one objection, one letter of support.
it just confused the issue. Obviously, if they've got one map showing one detail, one map showing another detail. So I've had to explain to a few people, no, it is there. So it was just a slightly misguiding situation. I think that the original consultation was, the original maps that were provided were much smaller with much less impact. And I don't know if full appreciation has been given for what's here.
I agree there could certainly be confusion when two maps are supplied, but what I'm being told is that at least one of those show the full extent of the application area. Members, any comments, questions, proposals? Councillor Riley?
Thank you. Can I just be clear about the matter of noise? So I've read the papers and I just want to be clear about what the EHO's proposal is in terms of mitigation, because we are talking about a site that is going to be running on battery and doing some sort of propagation, and we are talking about a site that's overnight as well as daytime, and clearly in all matters, we don't just think about the resident population, we think about the ecological population as well.
Mr. Brown?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The EHO is consulted on this application, a specific reference to noise at Breach Oak Lane, and also to noise in Sycamore Crescent on the other application. His particular recommendation is as outlined for the Nuttiers Lane one, is actually outlined in the committee report, and that is a technical noise condition. And as Mr. Lee has said, there's no need to agree that with the applicant. That would go off the Secretary of State. We would prefer to have it agreed. The Secretary of State would probably prefer to have it agreed. But at the end of the day, if there's a difference, then we will notify the Secretary of State. And that is a specific condition which is very technical. And from the environmental health officer's point of view, he is saying that in fact that is satisfactory in the circumstances of this particular site to keep these levels of noise down below ambient noise levels. That is why it's so technical, because those are the levels that he wishes, those are the maximum levels that he would not want to see extended on the site. And the equivalent set of circumstances or criteria would be applied to the other one. But as you heard from the applicants, they are generally in agreement as there should be a condition relating to noise. As I said before, this is very technical, it's very clear, it's very precise. There's a looser form of wording which we may be able to agree to at a later date.
But the point being made to us, Mr. Brown, I think by the applicants, was the question of enforceability of the condition. And that's what I think the board needs to be.
Well, that's why, Mr. Chairman, this particular condition is clear, it is precise, therefore it is very enforceable, which is why we're running with the Environmental Health Officer's recommendation.
So I'm just struggling to find it. Which condition number is it?
It's condition 15 on page 5, F 166.
That's expired. Councillor
Bell? I just go back to being told that it's not a pre-commencement condition, so it does not need to be agreed with the applicant or applicants, I should say. Therefore, were we minded to support this application or both these applications as they stand, then they would go forward to the Secretary of State as they stand. So I don't see any reason why we should say to the Secretary of State, but we haven't agreed this condition, because it doesn't need to be agreed. So why do we have to draw that to the attention of the Secretary of State? If we say we are minded to support this application or these applications as they stand, then that's the condition, isn't it?
Mr. Chairman, if it is referred to the Secretary of State, I'm duty bound to the Secretary of State to point out that the applicant is not in agreement with that particular condition. I have to let him know.
But they're not required to agree.
They're not required to, I know, but I have to let him know that those particular condition is not, because, Councillor Bell, there's the possibility of an appeal against that condition.
And what concerns me, Councillor Bell, is simply that the applicants, both or individually, may choose to apply for a change in condition. In which case, the guidance that the officers will give you is whether the change is material or not. And then we're into a whole world of pain in terms of deciding. Now, what I'm not clear on is the relative enforceability of each of those conditions.
Yeah. Well, it's such an important one, and that's what I was trying to get, whether we maintain control over that condition by being minded to support this, and Mr Brown is telling me that we don't. So I am really concerned about taking any decision until that condition is actually agreed.
Councillor Hancock?
I was just about to agree with Councillor Bell. My issue here is that as much as we will probably be I would be minded to support this application on the outset, I feel really uncomfortable that both applicants are deliberately, and it is deliberate, not agreeing to this before it goes to Secretary of State. And knowing that Mr Brown has to tell the Secretary of State this isn't agreed, and they want to change some kind of, have a little bit of a conversation about their noise issue, I don't think that makes us feel confident. And actually, I don't think we can make the residents feel confident. And for that point, I can't support this now. Unless they're willing to go back to the table and come up with an agreement on the noise issue so Mr Brown can go back to the Secretary of State and say it's agreed, I would be unable to support this now.
Where I am, members, is I'm struggling to understand the relative merits of both. I'm equally always wary of sending these things back for determination without a decision. So, Mr Tobin, some legal guidance, I think. Is the board, because this is a minded to support rather than consent, is the board at liberty to be minded to support subject to a formal agreement between the applicant and the authority on the exact wording of the noise condition? Or do we have to agree the noise condition? Given that it's not a pre-commencement issue, it's something that we are able to do. Can we do a subject to it or not?
You said, because it's operational rather than pre-commencement, agreement isn't needed. It would something else helpful when agreement can be reached. But I think the point was that which Mr Brown made, that potentially going forward, if there was an appeal against, if which is granted an appeal against any condition, the fact that they didn't agree would be relevant to that point, because they see if they've agreed to something, the merits of appealing it are somewhat limited. And I think that's the distinction that was being made. But the key thing is that any condition needs to be clear and enforceable. And this, as it's written, is clear and enforceable. If your condition was that there should be a future agreement on something, of course, that in itself isn't clear and enforceable because you don't know what that agreement will be. So if you're going to the Secretary of State without, that matter might still not be agreed. It's subject to further negotiation. So if it's referred to the Secretary of State, you want some certainty.
Agreed. Now, this is a certainty, but then there is the opportunity for appeals and further discussion. Members, I don't feel as though I properly understand the relative merits of either of these. And I frankly, I wish it hadn't been brought to us until there was clarity. Councillor Hayfield.
Yeah, the overall principle of what they're trying to do, I'm supportive of, but the sites are quite different, I think, in circumstances. I mean, the Breach Oak Lane one, for example, that's quite a, Breach Oak Lane itself is very heavily wooded lane. And if on Small Lane is also quite heavily wooded. Now, whether you say wooded areas have any impact on noise or not, but you've also got the background noise from the motorway that they've been living with for a long time. And so I don't know whether the noise that would be generating this would be greater or lesser than the background noise coming from the motorway. So there's a question. I just don't know. Likewise, the New Arley one, there's a big block of woodlands at the back of Sycamore, between Sycamore and this site. So I'm generally I'm minded to support them, but if others have, and the heritage bit, I've read the heritage bit as people were talking, and frankly, what the heritage people seem to be saying is, we haven't done enough to convince us there's nothing there. There was never any suggestion there was anything there in the first place, but they haven't done enough to convince them that there definitely isn't anything there. So I'm not worried about that.
You more than anybody, Councillor Hayfield, will know the difficulty of proving an absence of archaeological remains.
Yes, absolutely. Keeps people like me in business.
Councillor Parsons, then Councillor Hunt.
Yeah.
I mean, having looked at the noise assessments here, to be honest, I'm absolutely none the wiser. You know, I can understand that we're told that this noise level doesn't exceed the ambient noise, but I don't really know what that means. But I've got a fair idea what the ambient noise level means and is likely to be, but these figures don't mean a lot. I mean, in that sense, I suppose I'd accept the environmental health recommendation, but I'm assuming that when this does go off to the Secretary of State, if it does, and they are told that there isn't agreement on this, that this will be subject to some considerable technical scrutiny, which I don't have the ability to give. And in that sense, you know, either I think we need the technical advice on this as to what these figures mean, or it has to go to a body which is capable of assessing that, because I don't think we are, essentially. Having partaken this, you know, having attended the site visits, both sites to me seem to be reasonably good sites for this development. They were relatively remote. Neither of them were terribly, you know, you had to go and look for them, or you'd have to go to look for them to be visually aware of them to any great extent. And as such, seem to be filling a good purpose without terrible harm. I'm mindful to support this, but I would like some reassurance as to where this sound assessment is going. And that's my problem. I don't think we're technically able to, well, I'm certainly not technically able to make sense of that. And I wonder where that expertise is going to come.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lee, I can't invite you back into the conversation. Mr. Tobin, my experience has been that the Secretary of State will tell us whether he's going to call it in or not. And if he calls it in, then he might consider these details. But if he decides not to call it in, he goes with the recommendation that we put. I'm not sure that the Secretary of State, in this particular case, would, if he decides not to call it in, would undertake any further work on this ought to be done.
No, it's only if there's, it will matter to be looked at fresh. So it either effectively either goes with the recommendation, or for this or any other reason, the Secretary of State might consider being impact and therefore
Councillor.
I was changing the subject slightly about the end of life of the projects. I'm reading here that they've got a 40-year life, or if they stop exporting electricity within 6 months of stopping exporting it. And it's about putting it back into, restoring it back to where it was. Well, we got experience at Dore Mills of restoring property after it stopped. You know, 65 years of coal mine, and then it got too expensive to do anything about restoration. Is there anything we can do to fix it in a way that it has to be restored?
Whilst you might be trying to draw a conclusion and have uniformity across planning applications, Councillor, you need to treat each application on its merits.
That was ambient.
Was anybody else? Did I miss anything? Councillor Dawson?
Just that I generally support solar farms. I think the original siting, the original maps were brilliant and would have been fully accepted. I think the expansion of those maps now impacts significantly on the community that I live in, and the community of dog walkers and everybody else that explores around us. I think it has become more ambitious than the community can cope with. And I think without the reassurances and the clarification about the noise impacts, and without those guarantees that that will not have significant effect, that I can't support the proposed acceptance at the moment.
I'm largely with you on this, Councillor Dawson, but one thing I would say is, in agreeing to this, tonight, then we would have clarity because we have the consent with the condition that the EHO has proposed. It would have to come to us again for variation, I think. Is that the case or not?
Yeah, if it goes through and is granted as it is, if they wish to vary that condition, or some aspect of their operation which would have an impact, then it would be in the hands of the board to take appropriate action at that time. And obviously that's difficult to say because it's, you know, the event that hasn't happened. Otherwise, if it goes through and it has that consent, that it stays with that condition if that's what's attached.
So I'm not here to give you guidance, but in my head, what I think we need to determine is, do you think you have confidence that there is adequate clarity of the protection for residents from noise? Are you broadly content with the guidance, or do you need more information, and perhaps from our own EHO, to explain exactly how that will arrive or not? In no particular order. Secondly, do you think the issues raised by the objectors have been dealt with appropriately or not? And to my mind, most importantly, are you confident that the reasons given by the applicants for the very special circumstances of this development, these developments going ahead in the Greenbelt, are adequate to overcome Greenbelt policy? Does anyone else wish to speak, or shall we move to a vote? Councillor Hayfield.
I'm probably going to get your questions wrong and things. Well, your things were wrong. In terms of the Greenbelt thing, I think that's covered. I think it's a really good series of officer reports. I mean, they cover a vast amount of stuff. I think the issues of Greenbelt are addressed in this to my satisfaction. I think the issues of noise, whether the applicants like what our specialist officers are saying in terms of noise, but I think the report conditions address that to my satisfaction. And given that we can impose those later because they're not pre-development conditions, I take some comfort in those. And I think that you should try and make a determination tonight.
Yeah, I agree.
And is there a recommendation?
Well, you want to take them separately, weren't you?
I do.
So which is the first one?
The first one can be whichever you propose first, but I would suggest small stroke breach Oak Lane, application 605.
Which I'll move, in which case I'll move with the officer's recommendation with minded to support.
Is there a seconder? Are there any other proposals? In which case members will move to straightforward vote on application 605 for small stroke breach Oak Lane only. It's been proposed and seconded that we write to the Secretary of State saying that we are minded to support the grant of planning consent. Those in favour? And those against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Councillor Hayfield?
Can I make the same recommendation for the applicant?
So, members, this is application 651 for Ludhurst Lane. It's been proposed, and do I have a seconder? That we write to the Secretary of State advising that we are minded to support the grant of planning consent for this application. Can I see those in favour? Are those against? Both applications are granted for referral to the Secretary of State. Members, we now move on to agenda item number 6, which is an appeal update. Anything to add to your report, Mr. Brown?
No, nothing, Mr. Chairman.
Members, any questions or comments?
You would recommend. Second.
Those in favour? Any against? Thank you very much. We now move to agenda item number 7, the levelling up of the regeneration bill. Anything to add to your report, Mr. Brown?
No, Mr. Chairman. Unless members want to ask questions, I appreciate there's a lot of bullet points in there, and following a series of seminars with chambers, a number of chambers, those bullet points are the main issues which are arising from the bill. Members got questions, I'll deal with that one, Mr. Chairman, or even outside the meeting, Mr. Chairman, if members want to either a further report at a later date, or if they've got questions in the interim, then we'll do our best to answer them.
I'll move the report be noted, Chairman.
Okay, Chairman, can I suggest that we do want something outside the meeting, more or less? Maybe.
Give us a bit of guidance, Councillor Bell.
Well,
I have a regular meeting on Friday afternoons with
Yeah,
Mr. Brown.
well, okay, it might be part of that. It's just that there is quite a lot of this report that's got potential changes and stuff.
Councillor Hancock.
In addition to that, maybe we could do it before a planning meeting and have a little bit of training and actually go through it. Because I've read through it, there is a hell of a lot of changes with street voting and various other exciting things as well. I do think it might be good for everybody before a planning meeting, because we're all here. If that's okay with everybody else.
I'm not being rude, well, not intentionally rude on this occasion, Councillor Hancock. So I'm just trying to see if we've got anything in advance of the next planning meeting, which I think will be on July the 4th. Is that right?
Okay.
I've got nothing in my diary. So, Mr. Brown, can we have a presentation to members before the meeting on the 4th of July?
That'll be at 5 o'clock.
Yes. Members, you'll have to bring your own burgers and hamburgers and Stetson hats. So it's been proposed and seconded that the report is noted and that we have a detailed briefing on the 4th of July. Those in favour? Any against? Thanks very much. That's carried. Members, I now move the recommendation of agenda item number 8 for the exclusion of the public and press and the turning off of the live broadcast.
So moved.
Excellent. Those in favour? Thank you very much. That's carried. We'll just wait a couple of minutes to be sure that we are officially turned off.